You ever feel like you're standing right in the middle of a crowded room with 10,000 people screaming your name until their lungs burn and the air gets so thick with their breath you can't even find a clean pocket of oxygen to pull into your own chest? But even with all that noise, you're the only person left on God's green earth, friend? That's how it starts. A quiet kind of cold that moves into your bones and stays there like a winter that won't ever break, no matter how many gold rings you wear or how many Cadillac keys you got jangling in your pocket. And tonight, inside these white walls of Graceland, the silence is so heavy, it feels like it's going to crush the ribs right around my heart. I'm sitting here in my study, the millionaire's den, as some of the boys call it, surrounded by gold records that look like frozen, polished suns hanging on the walls. And I'm looking at a man in the mirror I don't even recognize anymore. A man they call the King. A man who's supposed to have everything a human being could ever dream of. But all I see is a tired boy from Tupelo who's lost his way in a labyrinth made of money, ego, and neon lights. The rain is hitting the windows now, a steady southern rhythm that reminds me of the way the water used to drum on the tin roof of that two-room shack where I was born, back when we didn't have a nickel to rub together, but we had a kind of peace that I haven't seen in 20 years. It's funny how the more you have, the more you realize that the things that really matter, the way the dirt feels under your bare feet on a summer evening, or the sound of your mama's voice humming a gospel tune in the kitchen, don't have a price tag at all. But nobody tells you that when you're 20 years old and chasing the ghost of a dollar across a stage in Las Vegas. I got this contract sitting on my mahogany desk, a $5 million deal that the shadow, that's what I call my manager when the lights are low and the room feels too small, just laid down with those greedy, soft fingers of his. And he looked at me with those cold, calculating eyes that only see bank statements and decimal points and said, "Sign it, Elvis. Sign it and keep the empire growing, because a millionaire doesn't walk away from a kingdom this big. But he doesn't understand that a kingdom can become a tomb if the walls are made of gold and the gates are locked from the inside by people who only love the version of you that makes them rich." I looked at that pen, a gold-plated thing that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hand, and I thought about the first guitar my mama, Gladys, bought me for $12.95 from the Tupelo hardware store, and how that cheap piece of wood and wire had more soul in one string than this whole $5 million empire put together. I remember the smell of that store, the dust and the oil, and the way the guitar felt in my hands, like a key to a world I hadn't seen yet. But now that I'm in that world, all I want to do is find the door back out. Just as I was about to put the nib to the paper, I saw it, a small, crumpled envelope tucked under the edge of the contract, a piece of paper that didn't belong in a room full of million-dollar deals and legal jargon. My heart started thumping like a trapped bird against my ribs because the handwriting was a ghost from a past I thought I'd buried under layers of fame, rhinestones, and prescription bottles, and it just said, "Jesse," on the front. The name of the twin brother I lost before we even had a chance to breathe the same air. And I realized that someone out there knew the boy behind the millionaire, the boy who used to sit on the back porch and sing to the birds because he didn't need an audience to tell him he was worth something. Arthur, the man in the red suit who thinks he owns every note I sing and every breath I take, he tried to grab it, his face twisting into that mask of professional fury, telling me to focus on the fame, the jets, and the fortune. But I told him to get out, and I felt a power in my voice I hadn't felt in years, a power that didn't come from a bank account, but from a soul that was finally, painfully, waking up from a long, expensive sleep. When the door clicked shut, I was alone with the rain and that envelope, and I opened it with fingers that were shaking so hard I could barely grip the paper. And inside I found a photograph of an old, dusty porch in Mississippi, the porch where I first learned to dream, and a note that asked why the man needed a crown when the boy already had the stars. I felt a lump in my throat that no amount of fancy champagne or Southern comfort could ever wash away, and I knew right then that I'd been building a wall of money to protect myself from the world, but all I'd done was build a cage that was keeping my spirit from flying back to where it belonged. Just then, Clara, that sweet girl who works here as a maid, a girl who probably doesn't have $100 to her name but has more light in her eyes than a Vegas marquee, she walked in with a tray of coffee, her simple blue uniform looking like the most honest thing in this whole mansion of mirrors and marble. She saw the tears in my eyes and the torn edges of that $5 million contract, and she didn't see the millionaire icon or the king of rock and roll. She just saw a man who was drowning in his own success. And she set that tray down and told me that her daddy back in the hills had nothing but the clothes on his back, yet he slept like a baby every night because his heart was light and his hands were clean. I reached out and handed her the diamond ring off my finger, a rock worth more than most folks make in a decade of hard labor, and I told her to take it to her daddy and tell him it's a gift from a friend who's finally learning that peace is the only thing worth a fortune in this life. As she left with her eyes wide and wet with tears, I walked over to the black piano, the one I've played 1,000 songs on but haven't really listened to in years, and I played a single chord, a bluesy, mournful sound that echoed through the halls of Graceland like a ghost looking for a way out. The phone on the desk started ringing, that persistent, shrill sound that I knew was Arthur, or the lawyers, or some promoter in London or Tokyo demanding their piece of the Millionaire King. But I didn't pick it up. I just watched the ink on the contract smear and run under the raindrops that had leaked in through the window I'd left cracked open. I realized then that you can't ever really wash the gold off your soul once you've let it in, but you can sure as hell try to find the person you were before the world told you that you had to be a product, a brand, and a god just to be loved. I stood there watching the sun start to peek over the gates of Graceland, casting long golden shadows across the floor that looked like bars of a cell, and I felt like a millionaire for the first time in my life. Not because of the millions of records sold or the cash in the vault, but because I'd finally stopped being afraid of the silence and the truth it carried. I thought about the thousands of shows, the bright lights that blind you so you can't see the faces in the front row, the way the sweat feels under a leather suit, and the way the applause sounds like a tidal wave that's always trying to pull you under. People think being a millionaire means you can have anything, but what they don't tell you is that you lose the ability to have nothing, to just be still, to be unknown, to be Jesse. I looked at the gold-plated faucets in the bathroom and the velvet curtains that cost more than a farm, and I realized I was just a tenant in a house built by a guy named Elvis, and I wasn't sure if I liked that guy very much anymore. But then I noticed it, a flicker of light shining under the hidden door in the back of my study. The one room nobody else, not the Memphis Mafia, not the girls, not even the shadow, is supposed to have a key to. And I felt a chill run down my spine that made the hair on my arm stand up. The only other person who ever had a key to that room has been resting in the ground for years, or so the world believes. And as I walked toward that door, my hand shaking so bad I had to grip my wrist to keep it steady, I wondered if the past was coming back to claim its due, or if there was one more secret in this millionaire life that was about to change everything I thought I knew about the king and the man. I opened the door just a crack, the light inside so bright it made my eyes water, and the smell of honeysuckle and old Memphis dust filled my lungs. A smell that transported me back to a time before the Cadillacs and the private jets, back when the only thing that mattered was the next song and the girl in the front row with the yellow ribbons in her hair. I saw a shadow moving inside that room, a silhouette that looked so much like a memory it made my knees buckle, and I had to ask myself if a man can ever truly walk away from his own legend, or if we're all just ghosts in our own houses, waiting for someone to turn the lights out and tell us the show is finally over. I stepped into that hidden room, and the door clicked shut behind me, leaving the $5 million contract and the gold records and the Millionaire King persona on the other side of the wood. In here, the air was different. It felt like Tupelo. It felt like the first time I heard a gospel choir sing in that little church down the road. It felt like the truth. I realized that my whole life I'd been looking for a way to be more, to be bigger, to be richer, But the greatest treasure was always in the things I'd left behind in my hurry to become a star. I saw an old wooden crate in the corner, filled with things I hadn't touched since the 50s. An old leather wallet, a bus ticket to Nashville, a pressed flower from a girl I loved before I knew what fame was. And I realized that the millionaire life was just a suit I'd put on. But under it, the boy was still there, waiting for me to come back for him. The shadow in the room moved again, and a voice I hadn't heard in a lifetime whispered my name, not Elvis, but Jesse. And in that moment, the wealth of the world didn't mean a thing compared to the sound of that one word. I stood there in the quiet, a man with millions in the bank, but finally realizing that his greatest asset was the soul he'd almost sold for a residency in a desert city built on illusions. I looked out the small, high window of that secret room and saw the fans gathered at the gate, their cameras ready, their hearts full of a love for a man who didn't really exist. And I felt a deep, aching pity for the version of me they were waiting for. I knew that tomorrow I'd have to put the jumpsuit back on. I'd have to dye my hair that jet black color again, and I'd have to growl into a microphone for the sake of the empire. But I also knew that from this night on, the Millionaire King was just a character I played, while the man lived back here, in the quiet, with the ghosts and the truth. The light in the room grew warmer, and I felt a peace wash over me that I reckon most kings would give up their thrones for in a heartbeat. I'm just a man, friend. A man who got lucky and then got lost. But tonight, the rain and the silence and a humble girl named Clara helped me find the trail again. I don't know how much time I got left in this palace, and I don't know if the world will ever let me be just a human being again. But I do know that I'm not signing that contract, and I'm not letting the shadow dim the light I just found. The diamonds on my fingers started to look like cheap glass compared to the sparkle of the rain on the window, and I laughed for the first time in months, a real deep laugh that came from my belly and not from a script. I reckon that's the real secret of being a millionaire, knowing when you have enough and knowing that enough is something you carry inside you, not something you deposit in a bank. So I'll sit here a while longer in this secret room where the ghosts are friendly and the music is pure, and I'll wait for the sun to come up and show me the way to the next stage of this long, strange trip I've been on. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening to an old man's ramblings on a night when the world feels too big and the past feels too close. Just remember, when the lights are bright and the money is flowing, don't forget to check under the contract for the things that really matter, because a soul is the only thing you can't buy back once you've let it go for a song. I'm going to stay here in the quiet for a while, just Jesse and the music, until the world calls for the king again. But this time, I'll be ready, because I know that the greatest show on earth is just being yourself, even if you're the only one watching. The rain is slowing down now, and the birds are starting to wake up in the trees around Graceland, and I can hear them singing the same songs they sang back in Tupelo, reminding me that some things never change, no matter how much gold you pile on top of them. I'm coming home, Mama. I'm coming home to the boy I used to be, and this time, I'm not letting go of him for all the millions in the world. I'll walk back out into that study in a minute. I'll face the shadow and the lawyers and the neon lights, but I'll be carrying a secret they can't touch and a peace they can't understand. The Millionaire King is dead. Long live the man who finally found his way back to the music. God bless you all, and stay kind to one another, because in the end, that's all we really got to hold on to in this big, lonely, beautiful world.